Okay, so you want to own a restaurant. Find a location, hire a chef, watch the tables fill up. That's the dream everyone carries around. Feed people. Build a place where the whole neighborhood shows up on a Friday night. It sounds like the most human business on earth. And it is. It's also one of the most brutal manufacturing operations disguised as a hobby. You are about to run a perishable inventory factory, a retail counter, and a staffing agency, all inside one building, all at the same time. And the margin for error is almost nothing. A restaurant that pulled $1 million a year might hand its owner $70,000 of actual profit. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing at all. So let's actually open this thing. First decision, what are you even building? Quick service and fast casual are volume games. Counter service, digital ordering, low labor per ticket. These concepts often land net margins between 6 and 9%, which in this industry counts as comfortable. Casual dining and fine dining are a different animal entirely. More staff per table, more ambiance, more expensive ingredients, and margins that get squeezed down toward 3 to 5%. Fine dining can occasionally push past that, up toward 10%, but only if the average check is high enough to bury the labor cost underneath it. Then there's the franchise question. Buy into a known brand, and you're paying for a playbook. Supply chains already negotiated, systems already tested, a name people already trust. That safety costs money. Initial franchise fees alone run anywhere from $10,000 for a smaller brand up to $90,000 for a premium one, and that's before you've built a single wall. Go independent instead, and you keep every dollar of profit. You can change your menu the day beef prices spike, and you own the brand outright. You also own every single risk with nobody to share it. Here's the trap most first-time owners walk straight into. They pick a beautiful, expensive, fine dining concept and drop it into a neighborhood that wants a $9 burrito. The restaurant doesn't fail because the food is bad. It fails because the math of the concept never matched the math of the street it's sitting on. And this mismatch is rarely obvious from the outside. A location can have heavy foot traffic and still be economically wrong for a given concept because foot traffic alone doesn't tell you anything about what those people are willing to spend or how often they're willing to spend it. A street full of college students walking past a wine bar isn't a marketing problem. It's a concept problem. No amount of advertising fixes a mismatch between what a neighborhood wants to pay and what a menu is priced to deliver. This is why experienced operators spend months studying a location's demographics, average household income, and existing dining habits before signing anything. Because once the lease is signed, the concept is basically locked in for years, whether or not the street ever wanted it. Now, the cost of actually opening the doors. The range here is enormous. Total build-out can run from $95,000 for a small, simple space to over $2 million for something ambitious. Buying your building averages around $178 per square foot. Leasing averages around $159 per square foot, which sounds cheaper until you realize you're renting that liability forever. Break the build-out into pieces and it gets more real. Construction alone can run anywhere from $100 a square foot for a light renovation to $800 a square foot for something built from the ground up. Kitchen equipment, the ovens, the walk-in coolers, the hood systems, land somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000. And that's assuming you're not buying everything brand new. Furniture and decor add another $10,000 to $50,000, sometimes far more depending on how upscale the concept is. Technology, your point of sale system, your kitchen display screens, your card readers, costs $5,000 to $25,000. And before a single customer walks in, pre-opening expenses alone, your first batch of inventory, staff training wages, your opening marketing push, can eat another $20,000 to $120,000. And then there's the cost nobody warns you about until it's already draining your bank account. The liquor license. In some states, this is a simple government fee, a few $100s, done in a week. In other states, California being the famous example, liquor licenses are capped by population. There are only so many to go around. So if you want a full license in a city that's already maxed out, you're not buying it from the government. You're buying it from someone else who already has one on the open market. A full liquor license in a major California city can exceed $400,000 before you've poured a single drink. Second problem. The one that quietly kills more restaurants than bad food ever will. Payroll. Most new owners budget for wages and think they've covered labor. They haven't. Add in the employer side of payroll taxes, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and whatever benefits you're offering, and the real cost of an employee runs 10 to 40% higher than their hourly wage alone. A healthy restaurant tries to keep total labor around 30% of revenue. Miss that number and the whole structure starts to wobble. But the number underneath that number is worse. Turnover. Quick service restaurants can see turnover rates above 130% a year, meaning some positions get refilled more than once annually. Casual dining sits around 75 to 100%. Even fine dining, the calmest end of the industry, runs 60 to 75%. Cornell University put an actual dollar figure on replacing a single employee, $5,864, once you count recruiting, training, and the lost productivity while the new hire finds their feet. Run a 50-person restaurant at typical turnover, and that invisible cost alone can quietly burn through hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Nobody puts that number on a menu. It's there anyway. Third problem. Food. The part everyone assumes is simple. Food cost is supposed to sit between 28 and 35% of what a dish sells for. Combine that with labor, and you get what the industry calls prime cost, and it needs to stay under 65% of total revenue. Cross that line, and there usually isn't enough left over to cover rent, insurance, and everything else standing behind the kitchen door. Here's the part almost nobody accounts for correctly. Raw weight is not usable weight. Vegetables lose 10 to 30% of their weight just from peeling and trimming. Meat loses 20 to 40% to cooking shrinkage alone. And expensive ingredients are not automatically profitable ingredients. Fresh seafood, truffles, anything highly perishable. If it doesn't sell before it spoils, the real food cost on that item explodes past anything on paper. The chef's most beautiful dish can be the restaurant's biggest financial leak, simply because it didn't sell fast enough. Now the part where owners try to claw some of that back. Pricing the menu. This is where a lot of the actual profit gets decided, quietly, before a single order comes in. Take a steak selling for $35 with $10.50 in ingredient cost. That's a 30% food cost. Sounds worse than a pasta dish selling for $18.95 with under $4 of ingredients, which comes in around 20% food cost. But look at actual dollars. The steak leaves $24.50 on the table after ingredients. The pasta leaves about $15. The steak, despite looking less efficient on paper, is doing more work paying the rent. This is why smart operators stop thinking in percentages and start thinking in categories. Every dish on the menu gets sorted. High profit and high popularity. Protect these, they're carrying the business. High popularity but low profit. Quietly shrink the portion or nudge the price. High profit but low popularity, move it higher on the menu, describe it better, get people to actually order it. Low profit and low popularity, cut it. It's not earning its spot on the page. And the psychology runs deeper than most guests ever notice. Drop the dollar sign from the menu, and studies out of Cornell show people spend about 8% more, simply because the visual reminder of spending money is gone. Put one wildly expensive item at the top of a category, and suddenly everything underneath it looks reasonable by comparison. None of this is illegal. None of it is even hidden. It's just quiet enough that nobody clocks it while they're deciding between the chicken and the salmon. Fourth layer. The costs that show up every single day, whether you sell one meal or 500, rent, taxes, and common area fees should stay between 6 and 10% of revenue. Utilities run another 3 to 5%, refrigeration never turns off, and a mid-sized kitchen can rack up $2,000 to $5,000 a month just keeping the lights and the walk-in cooler running. Marketing takes another 3 to 6%. And then there's the expense that quietly grew into one of the biggest line items in the entire industry. Card processing, Bibber your payment processing with your point-of-sale provider, and you often get locked into a flat rate, something like 2.5% plus 15 cents per transaction in person, closer to 3.5% online. Run $50,000 a month in card sales through that, and you're paying over $23,000 a year just to accept payment. Switch to an independent processor with a more transparent rate structure, and that same volume can drop to around $16,000 a year. $7,000 recovered just by not accepting the default option. So why do restaurants actually fail? Forget the number you've heard, that 90% collapse in year one. That figure traces back to an unsupported claim from decades ago with no real study behind it. The actual first-year failure rate for independent restaurants sits between 14 and 26%. About half make it past year 5. Around 1 in 5 make it 15 years or longer. When restaurants do fail, it's rarely the food. It's undercapitalization, spending every dollar on the build-out and opening with nothing left to survive the slow first few months. It's location, a spot where 3 previous restaurants already failed, usually stops attracting tenants at all, for good reason. It's an owner who can't read a daily prime cost report and doesn't notice the business bleeding until the bank account confirms it. And it's inconsistency. A kitchen that's brilliant on Tuesday and mediocre on Friday will never build the repeat business the math depends on. Here's the number that separates the ones who make it from the ones who don't. Once prime cost crosses 65% of revenue, there usually isn't enough gross margin left to cover the fixed bills sitting behind it. Recently, close to 42% of operators reported their restaurant wasn't even profitable. That's not a fringe outcome. That's close to half the industry, standing right at the edge. Fifth thing almost nobody thinks about until they're living it. An empty table is not neutral. It's a loss. Rent doesn't pause because a table sat empty for an hour. Once a dinner service ends, whatever revenue that table could have generated is gone forever. There's no way to sell it later. This is why table turnover matters so much. Casual restaurants aim for 2.5 to 3 full turns per service. Fine dining, with its slower pacing, might only manage 1 or 2. Every minute shaved off ordering and payment, every reservation that smooths out the rush, every delivery order that fills a kitchen during a slow afternoon. All of it exists purely to stop the restaurant's most expensive asset, its seats, from sitting there earning nothing. Now, how does a restaurant actually make money? Food gets people in the door. It's rarely what makes the business profitable. That job usually falls to alcohol. Beer, wine, and liquor carry gross margins of 75 to 80%, margins food can only dream about. That beverage program is often the quiet subsidy propping up the entire kitchen underneath it. Desserts and specialty drinks work the same way. Tiny ingredient cost, healthy price tag. Catering and private events push things further, typically landing 7 to 8% net margins because the volume, the menu, and the labor are all locked in ahead of time. No guesswork, no waste, no empty tables. Which brings us to the trap that swallowed an entire generation of restaurant investors: delivery apps. On paper, delivery looks like free money, more visibility, more orders, minimal extra cost. Here's the problem. Base commissions alone run 15 to 30% per order. Add payment processing around 2.9% plus 30 cents. Add marketing placement fees of another 1 to 5% just to rank in local search. Stack it all up, and the real cost of that delivery order often lands somewhere between 30 and 40% of its value. A $20 order might lose $6 to $8 before the restaurant sees a cent. Now remember what we said earlier. A healthy restaurant runs around 10% net margin. You cannot survive giving away 35% of an order to a delivery platform on top of that. The math doesn't complicate itself slowly, it breaks immediately. This exact miscalculation is what fueled, and then collapsed, the ghost kitchen boom. Investors poured enormous amounts of venture capital into delivery-only kitchens, betting that cutting out the dining room and the servers would finally make the math work. It didn't. A 30% commission on a 10% margin business is not a rounding error. It's structurally impossible. Several major ghost kitchen networks collapsed for exactly this reason. The same story investors had already watched play out with WeWork, just wearing a different apron. Fast money chasing a business that runs on decades-long real estate timelines, not 2-year venture return cycles. The operators who actually survived delivery didn't try to outnegotiate the platforms. They redesigned around them instead. They raised delivery-only menu prices by 10 to 20% above dine-in pricing, quietly, because the customer ordering from their couch was never comparing that price to the one printed on the in-house menu anyway. They stripped the delivery menu down to only the handful of dishes with the highest absolute contribution margin. Nothing delicate, nothing that dies in a cardboard box during a 20-minute drive. And they used every delivery order as a chance to slip in a discount code, pointing customers toward ordering directly next time, cutting the platform out of the relationship entirely. None of this makes delivery a great business. It just makes it survivable, which for a lot of restaurants during difficult years was the only requirement that mattered. Sixth thing. Reputation is now a direct financial input, not a vague feeling. A study out of Harvard Business School found that a single 1-star increase on a platform like Yelp translates into a 5 to 9% revenue increase for an independent restaurant. Flip it around, and a half-star drop does the same damage in reverse, quietly, through an algorithm that starts showing your restaurant to fewer people. For a restaurant pulling in $15,000 a month, a single lost star can cost $9,000 to $16,000 a year, and most owners never even see the mechanism doing it. Social media, local influencers, loyalty programs that capture a guest's phone number directly. All of it exists to build a customer base the owner actually controls, instead of renting attention from a platform that can turn against them overnight. Seventh, what happens once one restaurant actually works and you try to build a second one? This is where operational complexity stops growing in a straight line and starts growing sideways. Replicating the exact same quality, the same culture, the same kitchen timing across a second location is far harder than most owners expect. The common failure here is overborrowing to fund expansion or growing faster than the supply chain can actually support. Many growing brands solve this with a central kitchen, One industrial facility producing sauces, stocks, and prepped ingredients for every location, turning individual restaurants into assembly points rather than full kitchens. Done right, this locks in bulk discounts, slashes waste, and guarantees every location tastes identical. Done wrong, it means a massive upfront investment, a fragile cold chain logistics operation, and a serious loss of the freedom to change a dish on the fly. Franchising solves the capital problem differently, using someone else's money to open the next location, but only works if the operating system behind the restaurant is documented well enough that a stranger could run it without you in the room. The trap at that stage is almost always the same one, just at a bigger scale. A single successful location gives an owner confidence. That confidence gets mistaken for proof the model is ready to replicate. So a second location gets signed, often on a lease negotiated in a hurry, often staffed by promoting the first location's best people away from the kitchen that actually made them look good in the first place. The second location opens weaker than the first, not because the concept was wrong, but because the systems that made location 1 work were never written down anywhere. They existed inside one owner's head and one kitchen's muscle memory. Growth without documentation isn't growth. It's just duplication of risk. The brands that scale successfully treat the first location as a laboratory, not a finished product. Every recipe gets written down to the gram. Every training process gets filmed and repeated the same way twice before it's trusted to a second building. Every supplier relationship gets renegotiated for volume before it's needed, not after. This is the unglamorous, invisible work that separates a restaurant that becomes a regional favorite from one that becomes a 5-location cautionary tale passed around by the next generation of owners. So, after all of that, what does an owner actually take home? The national range for owner compensation runs from about $45,500 to $100,000 a year. Top operators in strong markets can pull $150,000 to $300,000. Picture a mature, well-run restaurant doing $1 million in revenue a year. Food and labor together, prime cost. Eat about 66.5% of that. Operating expenses take another 22.5%. What's left before debt and tax is roughly 10.9%. After debt service and depreciation, net profit lands around 7%. It's about $70,000. Add a reasonable owner's salary drawn from that same structure, and total compensation can pass $130,000 in a genuinely healthy year. Here's the gap that matters most. Let prime costs slip by just 4 percentage points. A little untracked waste, a little unplanned overtime, and that net profit doesn't shrink gently. It gets cut roughly in half. Let's talk about someone this actually happened to. Danny Meyer spent decades building Union Square Hospitality Group into one of the most respected restaurant companies in America. Union Square Cafe, Gramercy Tavern, Shake Shack eventually spinning out as its own public company. Meyer built his entire philosophy around what he called enlightened hospitality, treating staff and community as the actual foundation of profit, not an afterthought to it. And even inside that success, entire concepts under his own company have quietly closed when the real estate, the labor market, or the neighborhood shifted underneath them. Not because the food was wrong, because the surrounding economics moved and no amount of hospitality philosophy can out-argue a rent increase or a labor market that's dried up. So how does someone who literally wrote the modern playbook on restaurant hospitality still lose locations along the way? The answer isn't personal failure, it's structural. A restaurant's economics are hostage to its zip code, its lease term, and its local labor pool in a way almost no other retail business is. You can't relocate a kitchen the way you relocate a warehouse. You're locked to one address at one rent in one labor market for the length of one lease, and if any of those 3 things turns against you, the food quality upstairs becomes almost irrelevant. Now picture the disaster scenario nobody plans for. A restaurant signs a 10-year lease at the top of a hot market. 2 years in, a new development 3 blocks away pulls half the neighborhood's foot traffic away overnight. Reviews stay strong, food stays consistent. Revenue drops 30% anyway, because the flow of foot traffic changed, not the kitchen. Rent stays fixed. Labor stays fixed. The only number that moves is the one the owner has zero control over. How many people walk past the door? Keep this in mind before signing any lease longer than you can survive being wrong about. Let's run the actual 2 scenarios, because this is the sentence that matters more than anything else in this video. Optimistic case first. You open with realistic capitalization, not the cheapest option in every category. Prime cost holds at 62%, right in the healthy range. Revenue reaches the $1 million mark within the first 18 months. Beverage sales carry roughly 20% of total revenue at that 75 to 80% margin, subsidizing the food program the way it's supposed to. Net profit lands around 7%, $70,000 a year, and combined with a fair owner's salary, Total household income crosses $130,000. Reviews stay above 4.5 stars. Turnover stays manageable because pay and scheduling are treated as retention tools, not afterthoughts. Realistic case now. Prime cost creeps to 68%. A few points of untracked waste, a little scheduling inefficiency, nothing dramatic on any single day. Turnover runs at industry average rates, quietly costing tens of thousands of dollars a year in replacement and retraining that never shows up as its own line item. A one-star review slips through during a rough month and costs another 5 to 9% of revenue before anyone notices the pattern. Net margin, which looked like 7% on the business plan, actually lands closer to 2 or 3%, some years dipping into an outright loss once debt service is included. The difference between the good year and the bad year isn't philosophical. It's somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000 of actual take-home income, decided almost entirely by 4 or 5 percentage points nobody was watching closely enough. So, should you actually do this if the appeal is purely the food, or the idea of owning something as a passive investment? The numbers above are not on your side. The people who survive in this business treat it less like a passion project and more like the daily management of a razor-thin, cash-intensive manufacturing line, one that happens to also involve feeding people. 80-hour weeks. Holidays spent in the kitchen, thin margins that punish even small mistakes, personal guarantees on leases and equipment loans that follow you long after the doors close. There's a specific kind of person this business quietly filters out within the first year. The one who loved cooking at home and assumed that love would translate directly into running a kitchen for 200 covers a night. It rarely does. Cooking for people you love and cooking as a repeatable, cost-controlled, health-inspected industrial process are two almost unrelated skills that happen to look identical from the dining room side of the pass. The restaurants that survive are run by people who can do both, who can still care about the plate going out, while simultaneously watching a food cost percentage the way a pilot watches an altimeter. And there's a specific kind of person this business rewards, often disproportionately to the actual financial return. The one who treats the daily labor schedule as a puzzle worth solving properly, who reads a one-star review not as an insult, but as a data point, who understands that the espresso machine, the walk-in cooler, and the point-of-sale software are just as much a part of the craft as the knife skills are. For that person, the restaurant becomes something closer to a live, breathing system they get tuned every single day, and the community that forms around a restaurant that's actually run well becomes a form of wealth that doesn't show up cleanly on any profit and loss statement, even though it's just as real. But for everybody else, the honest advice is this: work in someone else's restaurant first. Learn where the money actually leaks before it's your own money leaking. It's not a romantic business. It's a business that happens to produce something romantic if you survive long enough to get good